Good morning, everyone. As he already said, the topic of my research was understanding the career trajectory of Black women in the UK health sector through an intersectional lens. So all I wanted to run through from my research was the background of the research, the aim of the study, existing literature, the research methodology I chose, the results and findings, and then the final summary. So a bit about myself and how I came onto this study was initially, so I work in finance, but from working in finance, my first research paper was understanding how women are underrepresented in management positions in the financial service sector in the UK. So I looked at that from a general perspective of women in the UK, but then I joined CCIR November last year, and I joined on the project of the research program of breaking the glass ceiling and understanding gender inequality in the workplace program. So essentially on that program, we looked at socialization, women in different sectors, understanding how intersectionality is nuanced and discrimination isn't just to be looked at through one lens. We looked at a variety of things, and I opted for healthcare as opposed to finance, which is what I was used to, because I wanted to look at a sector that had a lot of women in and a lot of women of color in. So the World Health Organization, as of 2020, found that 70% of the health and social care workforce worldwide was comprised of women. So I thought it made it the perfect industry to explore, and then also explore further through intersectionality, the glass ceiling, how that affects women, and the glass escalator. So a bit of background on the glass ceiling. So the Wall Street Journal in 1986 is where the phrase was initially coined. It's essentially just a phrase, metaphorical phrase for the glass ceiling that prevents women from being able to attain to management positions. So essentially barriers that affect women from attaining the same positions that some men are able to attain, even though they have the same qualifications, if not maybe more. Then the glass escalator, it's quite nuanced in that not a lot of men enter fields that are considered female dominated, for instance, maybe nursing. But when they do enter, they are given preferential treatment and propelled into heights that women in that same field aren't necessarily given the opportunity. So that's a long introduction, but an introduction and the catalyst behind how I came upon this study that I wanted to further look into. So the research background. So intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. So essentially looks at how marginalized women and their experiences and how they're neglected in legal, political, and social practices. So it explains how the discrimination that women face it can't be looked at through one axis. So when you're looking at, for instance, women of color, you can't look at that they're facing inequality just based on their gender. Race is also a societal identity, religion, culture, sexuality, and also disability are also factors that need to be looked at in order to understand fully how women are discriminated against. So as I mentioned previously, the World Health Organization, as of 2020, found that 70% of women were in the healthcare sector. However, they only hold about 25% of senior leadership positions, and Black women hold even less positions than that 25%, facing systemic barriers to leadership and to higher paid positions. So I thought that though the topic has been widely explored for the last 3 decades, it was critical to dive further and re-examine the issue, because it's been examined from the lens of just gender discrimination, as opposed to looking at how race, social class, sexuality, religion, etc. also hold weight in holding women back. So the aim of the study. So essentially the study just aims to present how multiple societal factors, as I've explained, through intersectionality contribute to Black women's career advancement, and also ultimately just showcasing barriers to entry that they face, but in all, advocating for more inclusive practices within the workplace. So in my study, I first, after the introduction, looked at the literature review, and in the literature review, I found 5 key themes. So socialization, early socialization, essentially your family, the norms and values you're brought up in, and then secondary socialization through education, religion, the media. That also subsequently shapes people's norms and values. And through the study, I found that Black women are predominantly socialized, not just Black women, but women of color, but particularly Black women, are socialized into caregiving, valuing caregiving, compassion, nurturing, and that often subsequently leads to pursuing a career in healthcare where they further want to look after people, care for people. The intersectional effect, Black women experienced a distinct type of discrimination that is both gendered and racial. Systemic barriers, unconscious bias, systemic racism, restricted access to networking, and limited Black women's leadership representation. This was found within the NHS Confederation. Cultural barriers, so cultural norms and pressures that Black women feel that they have to adhere to, and societal gender norms forcing them to prioritize their family over their careers. The glass ceiling and escalator effect, so Black women are more likely to be represented in lower paid positions in comparison to their male counterparts. And all this literature is what I found from what was already out there, and it's consistent to what I found with the participants of my study. They also found that they've experienced all 5 of these. So the research methodology. So for this study, I found that qualitative research would be the most logical choice. So interviews, focus group interviews particularly, So focus group interviews for this research, I essentially comprise of 20 participants, and for the sake of time, as most people on the CCIR program will know, it's a 13-week program, and then after that you have a 1-month window where you can still interact with your supervisor. So for the sake of time, I thought I'll go with the 20 participants I have. Even though the sample size was quite small, it was still good for me, as I had a few participants that their experience wasn't just in the UK, they had experience from their home countries before coming to the UK, or some had had experience in the US and Canada before ultimately settling in the UK. So it gave a quite varied response, as opposed to just women, Black women in the UK who have only worked in the UK. They had experience from all over. So for the sake of time, the time I had 5 focus groups, 4 participants per focus group, and approximately 100 minutes per focus group. They were done online on Zoom. So quickly, the sampling criteria, only 2 distinct things needed: self-identifying Black women, women of a Black racial identity, and currently in a medical or healthcare position in the UK. There were no stipulations on age, how long they'd been in the profession, just those 2 factors. I attained consent from the participants. So essentially I found 10 participants within my own network, and then through snowballing, they were able to reach out to their colleagues, and I gained a further 10 participants that way. So ethical consideration, informed consent was obtained, and anonymity was maintained throughout, and the participants were aware that they could withdraw at any time in the study. So as I said, the interviews were done on Zoom and lasted approximately 100 minutes per interview. Results and findings. So for occupations, I had about 45% were nurses, 15 were doctors, 1 was a student midwife, 10% were pharmacists, 10% were physicians, 1 was a surgeon, and 1 was a GP. So all in all, had about 7 occupations within the field. And then varied years of occupation, so ranging from 2 to 30 years within the field. And then participant ethnicity, all were black, but there were no mixed Caribbean, so mixed white and Caribbean, but 90% were of 90% were of African ethnicity. So yes, so this is the occupation, the years in occupations. We had 2, 10, 19, 20, 22, 24, 25, 29, and 30. So I thought that was varied years of experience, and I enjoyed particularly having those that were relatively new within the field, because their experience also gave a fresh perspective that most people were comparing from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, but we had the early years, those that had recently joined the field giving a fresh perspective. So the key themes I found from the participants' responses were the systemic barriers, which I mentioned earlier from the literature review. A lot faced microaggressions within their workplace. Many faced workplace harassment. And from here, I found that none had faced sexual harassment, but 78% had faced some form of verbal harassment, and 22% had faced physical harassment. Also limited upward mobility, particularly with those who were GPs, medical doctors, the surgeon, had felt that even though they'd hit necessarily a peak within their profession in terms of maybe management or whatever it may be, they felt that they'd kind of hit a wall and weren't able to break through further, and felt that a lot of their superiors felt that they should almost be grateful that they were able to even get to the position that they were, and felt that there were no networking opportunities to kind of nurture those coming underneath, or for them to even attain further than where they had been. So all in all, the key findings were systemic bias, race, and gender disparities hindered Black women's advancement in their medical and healthcare occupations. But one of the questions, I didn't actually have any interview questions talking about advocacy or structural change, but a lot of the women who were in from, let's say, 15 years above in their career all spoke about how they felt like they could advocate for those coming underneath them and requiring resilience to push further within their career. And that was a key theme of the women, at least from 10 years in their career and up. So this is a direct quote from one of the participants. So within the study, the only things that were made public were their occupation and years within their field, nothing else. So this was a pharmacist who has been in her occupation for 25 years and felt like as a Black woman in the industry, there weren't really access to promotions and hasn't been equal. And while she's gained experience and worked hard, there's still been limited opportunities for diversity in leadership roles. But despite these challenges, she continues to work on her skills and advocate for change, hoping for more opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds. Another direct quote from a physician who has been in her occupation for 22 years felt that women are often held to high standards and more was expected from them, and that she felt that she had to be likable and was scrutinized more harshly than either her white colleagues or her male colleagues. So assertiveness in men was seen as leadership, whilst it was misrepresented as difficult in women, but she had to learn and stand firm to her own space and to make no apologies from ambition. I touched on socialization earlier within the literature review. So essentially, I touched on how women were socialized to be nurturing, caring, soft, and accommodating. But what I didn't touch on is that for most males are socialized into being dominating, to be leaders, to be quite assertive, and that kind of in turn reflects in how she felt she was being treated at work, that because she wasn't exhibiting what is in turn to be an ideal woman, soft and nurturing, that it kind of affected her negatively within her work. But despite that, she makes no apologies for her ambition. So in summary, I split the summary into 3. So the overall conclusion, recommendations for not only myself, but anyone else looking to pursue researching a similar subject, and the contributions I feel that this study has contributed to. So the conclusions were that intersectionality offers a multifaceted approach to understanding how social identities interact to create a distinct experience of discrimination. So overall, the glass ceiling and the glass escalator, though they do examine gender inequality for women and how it affects them, it often just looks through a singular lens of just gender inequality, as opposed to looking at how women of color, their race, or women presenting like religion, whether there's religious garments that some women wear, or their sexuality or their disability. The glass ceiling and the glass escalator fail to account for those social identities of women. So looking at it through an intersectional lens allowed for a multifaceted approach. And these intersecting identities influence systemic and cultural barriers that shape the underrepresentation of Black women in senior positions in the UK healthcare sector. So recommendations for future research. The NHS and private providers, I found that though they did give statistics on the number of Black employees, there were no distinctions in whether the Black employees were female, whether they were male, and it kind of made it hard to write a detailed report, but there was some research readily available, but it was quite small. Also, from discussing with my supervisor, I found that there wasn't much transparent diversity inclusion data, DIE data, and that fair hiring for leadership diversity is something that would kind of push for more open and transparent data. And contributions. I found that this study contributed a comprehensive theoretical understanding of discrimination and overall advocates for consideration of how gender and race, in addition to other social identities, interact to influence the lives of Black women in the healthcare occupations. So, thank you. And then there's just some of the sources I used in this presentation.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. We really have a great start for today's set of series with a very strong qualitative presentation. Do we have any questions to start with?
I've got a comment. I'm an NHS consultant as a surgeon, urologist. I completely agree with your study because if you do a quick search, amongst the CEOs in the NHS organization, we've got about 158 hospitals. 80% are male, probably less than 20% are female, and of those, probably if you look at, there'll be probably one or two female CEOs of color in the country. So even after so many, so NHS celebrated, I think, 70 years of establishment, and even after 70 years of establishment, we're still lagging behind in that. So well done for doing this research.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-ups? Please go ahead.
What prompted you to do this study?
So initially, coming from a finance background, my supervisor did push me to go in that aspect, but I thought about the women that I know in my life, and the common denominator of the field they were in is healthcare or medical field. So I thought that that would be an interesting field to look at, because it would mean there would be more access to women of color from whom I could gain their experience from, as opposed to working in finance. There's very few Black women I was working with, and already my sample size was quite small. So I thought that having an industry that I know though it may be female dominated in some aspects, it would be easy for me to explore the glass ceiling and glass escalator, why, though they're saturated within the field, they're not necessarily represented in management.